Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. A SANS 2021 report, Top Skills Analysts Need to Master panel discussion, sponsored by DomainTools, Gigamon, and Palo Alto Networks. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. Today's featured speakers are Ismael Valenzuela, Analyst and Senior Instructor at SANS, Tim Helming, Security Evangelist at DomainTools, Devin Johnstone, Senior Staff Security Operations Engineer at Palo Alto Networks, and Bassam Khan, Vice President of Product and Technical Marketing Engineering at Gigamon. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to our presenters.
Thank you, Carol. It's a pleasure to be again this week, in this case with our guest speakers or panelists, Devin Johnstone, Tim Helming, and Bassam Khan. So we'll know more about them, and we're going to have a very interesting discussion about this topic, the top skills analysts need to master. And as you probably know, this is based on a webinar that we did last week. If you missed it, you have a chance to see that again. It's been recorded and you have it here on this link. So today we're going to have a discussion, but before that, let's go over the highlights of the report to kind of like frame the discussion we're going to have with our guests in a few minutes. This is based on a paper that was published. It's in the reading room, the SANS reading room, and it touched on these different topics. Analysts are time machines, the importance of doing critical thinking or investigations. We talked a little bit about human machine teaming, and also how analysts are not born, they are developed. Without getting into a lot of the details that we already provide in the PDF that you can download and read at your own pace, we just want to highlight some of the things that we discussed in that paper. For example, with this quote from Diana Bonomano mentioning that the brain has two purposes: to remember what it sensed from its environment in the past and to anticipate or predict the future. Well, that's what an analyst does, right? An analyst tries to predict the future, or tries to, I love this word, anticipate what could happen in the future based on what has happened in the past. And I mentioned in the webinar how I think about, for example, chess, a chess player that's trying to anticipate the movements of the opponent. Well, a security analyst, as an all-around defender, it's always in a constant battle with time. And we mentioned that one of the most important skills that analysts need to acquire is to understand not only the what and the how, but the when and the why use certain tools or products. We're going to mention this in the discussion as well, but I feel that the industry has been very focused on what we need to do, how we need to do it, but not necessarily the when or the why. We also examined in the paper what are the skills that makes an analyst effective at defending an organization against these threats across endpoints, networks, the cloud. And we talked about models. For example, models like the OODA loop, models like MITRE ATT&CK matrix, models like time-based security. And you can read more about those in the report. But one of the things we mentioned as well is that security analysts are essentially problem solvers, and that solving problems require specific skills. It could be said that an analyst is just an investigator, and there are more investigators out there than are not necessarily security analysts, right? Like doctors, like scientists. Essentially, it's a mindset, it's a philosophy, it's a way of thinking, a methodological, if I can say this, way of thinking, analytical way of thinking, right? Being inquisitive, etc. So is that something that you can learn, that any of us can learn, whether it's somebody that is new in the security space or somebody that has experience in security but wants to maybe become a better analyst, security analyst? Well, we discussed that as well. We talked about analysts can learn how to think in this way by implementing specific techniques. For example, asking questions, the ability to reason backwards. Do not think linearly. being detail-oriented, fighting unconscious bias. We talked about the gorilla experiment, right, that we will discuss maybe later on. Being curious and flexible, like a kid. All of these are skills, critical thinking skills, that can be developed and that can be trained. So we summarized everything in the form of a table or a matrix. We just go back quickly. Map to the OODA loop, the famous model that talks about observe, orient, decide, act. And we mentioned how time is a very critical factor here. It's a feedback loop. How this model mentions, highlights that the one that can cover or iterate through all of these stages of the OODA loop faster has an advantage over the opponent. You have a defender, an attacker, both of them have OODA loops. The one who can complete this OODA loop faster and adapt and being flexible faster will have an advantage. So we mapped each of these different phases to objectives, goals, questions that you might ask at each specific phase, and some of the tools that can help you, or the techniques that can help you at each of these different phases. So we're going to go deeper into some practical cases or applications in our discussion today. And finally, we talked about, we continue talking about chess. And remember, I used this quote from Garry Kasparov that he gave in a TED Talk in 2017 when he said, "Don't fear intelligent machines, work with them. A human plus a machine is not the future, it's the present." So yes, we have AI, we have machine learning, and we're going to continue to develop these capabilities, but we're also going to continue to need investigation skills and investigator professionals, security analysts. So in this new era, it's for us practitioners to work with these products from vendors, and we have vendors here in the panel today, and we need them to provide solutions that can augment the analysis, the analyst's cognitive skills, help us to take directional feedback, right, to organize high context data, augment our analysis performance. So we're going to discuss how vendors are working on this as well. And finally, we summarized the talk with these conclusions. An analyst is not born. You can develop these type of skills. This critical thinking is an ability that can be learned. And we also discussed some of the things that organizations can do to emphasize this type of skills and make sure that analysts spend more time analyzing and using their brains, helped by the solutions, by products, and doing less task-related, let's say, data collection tasks. Well, with this in mind, I'm going to introduce now our panelists, not before mentioning that this is an interactive session, so please submit your questions. As we go through this, I'm keeping an eye on the question and panel. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, please feel free to ask them there, and I will introduce them as we go through these questions and answer session. Okay. All right. So let me introduce our panelists. We have with us Tim Helming. He's a DomainTools security evangelist with over 20 years of experience in information security, from DNS and network to cloud to application and ICS attacks and defenses. At DomainTools, he applies his background to helping organizations understand the threat landscape, especially in the area of malicious online infrastructure. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us, Tim.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Devin Johnston, Senior Staff Security Operations Engineer at Palo Alto Networks, and has spent the better part of the past decade in the trenches of a SOC, and he brings his own experience in building a team from the ground up to the Palo Alto Networks SOC tour. So Palo Alto Networks, Devin led the development of the SOC automation program and is now responsible for data loss prevention and customer outreach. Again, thank you for being with us, Devin. It's a pleasure to have you. And hopefully we're going to talk a lot about the practitioner's approach. And that experience out of the SOC is going to be useful.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent. And finally, Bassam Khan. Bassam serves as a Gigamon Vice President of Product and Technical Marketing Engineering, responsible for positioning and promoting the company's products and solutions, as well as corporate and go-to-market strategy. So Bassam, Also very experienced, brings a strong track record of more than 20 years managing products and marketing for security, cloud, and collaboration technology companies. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, a pleasure to have you, Bassam.
Great. My pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So I don't think we need the slides now. So Carol, if you don't mind, maybe we can just get rid of those if you want to, or maybe we can just leave them like that. Up to you. But we're going to start with the questions to our panel. And I have a question in mind. We talked about skills, technical skills, but the paper also talks about soft skills. And maybe let's start with somebody that works in a SOC on a daily basis, right? Like Devin. What are some of the soft skills that make a good analyst? And please, all of you, feel free to comment on that.
It's a great question, and I think there is this stereotype on the attacker side of somebody who is isolated away in a basement somewhere by themselves, and that's not the kind of personality that you need for an analyst, especially when that analyst is duly responsible for incident response. They may not be the expert in all of the systems or applications that are involved in a security incident. They need to rely on other teams within their organization to come together and figure out what happened and then respond together. The security analyst role is duly a coordinator role when it comes to an actual incident response. So there's a lot of communication skills. It's coming to the table and connecting people who may have different levels of technical skills, and then taking what you're learning throughout an incident response and even reporting that upwards to executives. So there is the kind of personality involved with understanding yourself as much as possible, what's going on, and then being able to connect those folks in the organization who may not be as technical.
Very, very good answer. So I highlighted coordinator and the ability to bring together a lot of people. So does it make sense to think of a security analyst as somebody that can, I think about a camera lens, right? Zoom in and zoom out. So somebody that can see the technical details, but at the same time can also step out and see the bigger picture. That's kind of a tricky skill, right? Team, what do you think?
Makes total sense to me. I would say also, and I love what Devin said about this. I would say that in that kind of coordinator role, in these kinds of positions, you, as you said, you rely on other teams and you work closely with other teams, and so having a lot of good sort of diplomacy skills and just being a great team player across teams is so important, because you're going to need things from other folks, and you want to be the person that they're happy to say yes to and to help out, and so those things are important. And then the other one that occurs to me is, because this is one of these, and this is true of so many positions, but you're constantly learning, right? It's just an absolutely forever learning kind of position, that having this concept of beginner's mind, where you're able to absorb information continuously, learn new things, and shut down the part of your brain that goes, yeah, I already know this, I already understand this. Being able to quiet that down and say, maybe I don't fully understand this, or this is something new, so hey, brain, pay attention. I think that's another really key thing.
That's an interesting point, because sometimes you see, especially in these type of fields are very technical. Sometimes we feel like ashamed of saying, hey, I don't know about this, because it feels like, and this might be a good advice to people that are starting in the field. And I see some questions related to that already in the panel, right? Hey, I'm new on this, how do I get started? Well, even for people that is very experienced, having that humble attitude and realizing that, hey, nobody knows everything, right? I'm pretty sure I can learn from each of you a lot of different things that I have not experienced, even in over 20 years of experience. That's important. I like that. Forever learning.
Diplomacy is a great word. Coming to the table and trying to understand with those folks, what are the struggles that they're having? Nobody likes to be told, this is how you're going to do your job. People don't work well in that kind of environment. Trying to understand their case and understand why there might be an insecure practice going on in the first place is going to get you a lot further.
Especially in a high stress environment, right? Let's face it, when you work in a SOC, there's typically a lot of stress involved. So So being able to de-escalate situations, and as I said, putting on somebody else's shoes, it's key as well. Well, that takes me to another question. I was thinking, we're talking about soft skills and how critical they are, but why is that security professionals are focusing so much time on learning tools and technologies? Bassam, what do you think?
Good question, Ismail. I guess first and foremost, analysts are pretty inquisitive to begin with, and to that's the point you were making earlier, that's part of their job. And curiosity leads them and everybody to learning new tools. And you mentioned that in the actual report as well. But there's more to it than that. And one reason analysts have to spend a lot of time, what we're seeing on tools and technologies, is staff turnover, which also tends to be high for some of the reasons you talked about earlier around work stress and so on. So new analysts are coming in and constantly coming into new and different types of tools and kind of relearning. So that's one reason. Secondly is actually on us. It's as industry security solution providers, present company excluded, we've done a terrible job of delivering solutions that just work. You know, we vendors put a huge amount of unnecessary systems care, unnecessary feeding on the practitioners, on the actual security teams, which means responders are quite often distracted from their day-to-day job and putting that into tools maintenance and such. So in short, yes, you know, security professionals do focus a lot of their time on tools and are constantly being distracted from the core function, which is defending.
Interesting. Any other comments on that, Devin or team? I think
the field of tools is ever growing as well. So it's not even just a handful of tools anymore. I don't know if anyone's seen one of those big charts lately that shows how many security tools there are out there today. I don't know any industry where a single individual is going to be able to know how to operate 100 of those tools. It comes down to the concepts, you know, really what is the goal you're trying to achieve, and then applying that to whatever tool you may have in place wherever you're working and where you're trying to enforce security.
Yeah, and this is where there's a really big challenge with, you know, one of the points that you made, Ismail, in the report about analysts need to spend less time on tasks and more time on critical thinking. And these two things are in contention, you know, absolutely. And there's no one simple answer to that kind of paradox, but you know, I think there would be a hope that with some upfront investment in time in becoming really adept with the tool suite that you're using, those things can become muscle memory and can become second nature, so that you can spend more of that time with critical thinking and analysis and less time actually going, yeah, how did this widget work, and what do I need to do to make this thing give me the information I'm looking for.
If I can just add on to what actually both Devin and Tim just talked about around the variety of tools. So there's a variety of tools and new tools popping up, and it's always changing because the attack landscape's always changing. The other thing I can speak with authority about are whole other set of tools around marketing and you know, demand generation and sales and so on. So Salesforce, you know, Marketo, Eloqua, Bombora. There's tons of these tools that I've been, you know, I know hands-on perspective. The thing that's different with those tools is that the nature of the work at the end of the day is the same. It's not like there's brand new adversaries that are coming in and changing the game on you. That's not being kind of forced on you. So this is what makes the tools and the time spent on tools also very laborsome for analysts, is the fact that not only once you learn something, not only is it there, but it's going to change really quickly.
Right. So I hear that, you know, the industry in general, right, and vendors obviously have a big play there, needs to work more on the integration, I guess, of the tools, so we can have maybe less tools and more focus, and also the user experience, right, making it easy for these practitioners to be able to do what they want to do without having to spend a lot of time figuring out, as Tim said, how does this widget works, right? That takes me to another thought. In the paper, we talk about models, and Tim mentioned muscle memory, right? So I think these models help you to kind of learn that mindset, that philosophy. So hopefully it becomes muscle memory. Just obviously by reading about those models, it will not become muscle memory. But we talked about MITRE ATT&CK matrix, or the framework in general. Time-based security, which is a model that I particularly love, and you probably saw that in the paper. I talk about that a lot. OODA loops, which is also about time, right? The cycle and the feedback loop. How do you think we could use these frameworks, but now put them into something more practical, like moving from simply describing behaviors to now building skills? Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I think, for example, to look at the attack framework, which is a really valuable tool. I think, you know, one of the things that occurs to me with that is that there are so many of these individual cells in the table that represent TTPs and specific actions that you might see from an actor. And as an analyst, you know, I imagine that when you're looking through that, when you find areas of that where you realize that you probably don't know as much as you could, it's a great opportunity to kind of start building your own kind of your own skills. Like, you know, give yourself a mentally a badge when you've learned a particular cell from the attack technique, and stack those badges into your sort of self-certifications, not for anybody else's purpose, but for you to identify where there are things that you might not be as strong at and that you might not be able to identify and respond appropriately to from a muscle memory point of view. So, you know, color in the squares when you've got the different things and you have a good understanding of them. And then, yeah, coming back to that, that willingness to learn and that kind of humility that you bring to it, and say, you know, you can go off all by yourself where you don't have to tell anybody else, but you can say, hey, I realize I don't know this area so well, and I feel like I probably need to. So that's going to be something I focus on this quarter, for example.
I like that. Give yourself a badge. I'm going to adopt that. Or a coin, right? A challenge coin, for example.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like a bingo card. You know, you got the matrix there, and this TTP, this line. I know that one.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Any other thoughts, Devin or Bassam, on any of these models? How can we make it more practical?
Well, the best model out there, and there's many models, is the one that you use, the one that you practice. And so quite often it's easy to just take care of some problem in a quick way, an incident that just happened, I can go fix it quickly. But without documenting, without tracking, without kind of historical look back at here's a pattern and here's a campaign that we're experiencing and so on, it gets a little bit less, work gets a little bit harder the next time this happens, and especially with personnel turnover that we had talked before. So models are super important, and there's several different top models out there. But again, it's all about practice, all about using and sticking to.
Just printing it and putting it on the wall is not going to do anything for you, right? You gotta practice it.
That's right.
And, you know, that makes me think: are there any other roles in cybersecurity that may have the same challenges that analysts face, or that maybe analysts can learn from? What do you think, Devin? I see you nodding there.
Yeah, very timely question. I just wrote my CISSP this week, 8 different domains. Sorry, Sans, I don't know if I can talk about CISSP here.
You can, absolutely. You can talk about anything.
You know, talking about security today, I sit in the SOC, but there's 7 other areas that I was reading through and went, wow, all of this is super relevant to what I do. We've got risk management, identity and access management, security engineering. Now we're moving into secure software development up in the cloud. So there's all of these other cybersecurity roles, from infrastructure, you know, blending with IT and having fusion operation centers now where the network team and the security operations team are actually part of the same organization. So this goes beyond just the traditional analyst work of responding to alerts, but now we're shifting left and trying to be proactive, including security in the development of software and applications and building of architecture. So all of these skills that were mentioned in the report and that we're discussing today can be applied to many of those different roles. It's the critical thinking and identifying what is going to be a risk to my organization, and how can I get in front of it, implementing those controls, working with other teams to implement those. The scope of security today is so broad, and it just continues to grow.
So essentially what we're saying is that a lot of these recommendations are applicable to many other roles in security as well. Yeah,
100%.
Absolutely. And I like what you said. Each of your comments is like, pearls of wisdom. You talked about shifting left, being more proactive. That takes me back to something we discussed in the paper as well, which is the concept of time-based security, which again, it's very simple, right? It's almost like obvious, but it helps to visualize what's your goal. Your goal is to shift left, to push to the left as much as possible of the attack chain, trying to be proactive. So why do you think it's such a critical factor, time, when we talk about this type of investigations, reacting to incidents? What are your thoughts, Bassam?
Yeah, so time is definitely of essence because adversaries aren't waiting around and the risks are super high. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is that adversaries aren't running on your schedule, they're running on theirs. And this actually goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Ismail, which is creates a high pressure situation for analysts. And frankly, it leads to burnout that you also mentioned earlier. And that's something that we see quite often. So from our perspective, the tools that they use shouldn't only alert, but should provide guidance, particularly when the pressure is high, when there's an active incident going on. And from our perspective, Gigamon's perspective, we also provide not just a product and a platform, but also threat and adversary expertise, incident management guidance that's available whenever that's needed the most, which is, again, when this is happening, it's the middle of time critical item. So I mentioned earlier that analysts work distracted because of tools maintenance, but this is also analysts working alone. So without having somebody to go to and somebody's kind of just oversee, and by the way, we don't provide a managed service, that's completely different. But having an expertise prevents you, the analyst, from having to work alone and being distracted. And so that's kind of what we're trying to address, is the concept of analysts. How can we help that role, that persona, more than in more ways than they've otherwise been able to get?
I like that, providing guidance, right? So it's not just I take over and I do everything myself. That would be more like a playbook, which we're probably going to discuss later. But no, I'm going to give you guidance on what to do next, especially during an investigation. Which brings another point that we usually discuss in the context of a SOC. How much time do you spend investigating, right? When do you decide that, hey, I have enough information to decide, what is happening here? And there's always a huge backlog of things that you need to triage, right? Typically, it's not that you have one or two things to look at every day. So what do you think, Tim? Is there any guidance there?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, and I'm super interested in other perspectives on this. But I think there are a couple of things that can help with that. When you're thinking about, okay, I'm looking at something, I need to do the some of the kinds of thinking that you talked about in the report, where I apply nonlinear thinking and I game out kind of what are the ramifications of this. Am I seeing the whole incident? Am I understanding the full scope of what it is that I think I'm seeing here? And you can game that out quite a bit. How do you decide when you're done? I think some of it boils down to certainly as when you have a sense of the magnitude, how far reaching is this? How big a deal is it? You obviously, triage is going to be the process where you're going to help figure that out. But one of the important things, I think, is when you reach a point where you have a plan for what the mitigation is, ask yourself, if I'm wrong about this and this sort of plays out, or if there are variations on what this seems to be that could be a little bit different, will my mitigation cover those? Because if it will, then stop. Like, do the mitigation, you've got it covered. But if the answer to that is, I don't know, I think it's A, but if it really is B and my mitigation won't solve B, then you probably need to go a little bit deeper. But there's probably no one size fits all answer to that question.
That's a very good question. Will my mitigation cover this? And that's where I think the models we described in the paper, for example, MITRE ATT&CK, talking about chess. To me, MITRE ATT&CK is the chessboard. So if you know where you are, if you are at the point where you know in which cell you are, you know what has happened before, what could happen in the future, you can have a better idea of the mitigation plan, right? I like that. I like it. Any other ideas?
Yeah, if I can jump in a little bit, actually address this and the previous question as well. So there's multiple security tools, different areas of functions within security that we talked about earlier. Plus this around when is it really done? It's never done. That is the short answer. Spoiler alert. However, there's some things that we learn from a remediation perspective, and we want to next time, for the next time, want to automate that as much as possible. So automation using SOAR or whatever the framework might be is a really powerful way of being done. I hate to use that word being done, but at least being more functional in that particular adversary behavior or attack. So it's basically things like tying in suspected traffic that you're monitoring more closely. So for example, let's say you can't decrypt all of your traffic all of the time for all of the hosts and so on. However, if Bassam's machine is acting weird or communicating to suspect sites or whatever, maybe we should take his traffic and have an automated process that takes and decrypts it and puts in the storage, full pipe capture kind of storage or whatever else might be necessary, setting it to more tools. So part of being done, or at least kind of closing the book until it reopens again, is building an automation to take into account what just happened, and next time it happens, we already have a procedure that's automation based and also methods based that's in place. So that's where multiple systems can come in together through automation and kind of get us to a point where we're done.
Right. That's a good example of augmenting the analyst capabilities right there. Yeah, thanks for bringing up specific use cases. And since we're talking about investigators, critical thinking, analysts, I think one of the challenges that organizations have is, first of all, knowing what to look for, especially if you're staffing a SOC or building a SOC. And the other one is, where do you find these people, right? And here we're talking about developing these skills, but is there anything specific that you guys look for when you're looking for this type of roles, security analysts, somebody to work in a SOC? For example, Devin, you work in a SOC. What do you look for, and how do you find these candidates that can help some of the people that is attending the webinar that may be trying to find a position as a SOC analyst?
Yeah, to Tim's point, one size doesn't fit all, and this is where we really want a breadth of experience from folks who have different backgrounds. I get a lot of questions today of, well, I can't hire a SOC analyst. I can't find enough people who have SOC experience, but I've worked with a lot of really talented people in the SOC who joined the SOC without SOC experience, but they had other experience in technically skilled areas where they understood different platforms or systems or areas of the environment. And we taught them how to do the incident response side, and they've become very valuable members of the SOC team. It is at its core the type of personality who likes to figure out how things work. That's who makes a good investigator. So looking for folks who like to problem solve or have a genuine interest in figuring out at its core, how does this platform work, or how does this workflow operate? When you're interviewing for those kinds of roles, the best way to figure out who those folks are is scenario-based questions. So rather than going down a list of what do these acronyms mean, or what does this certification provide, asking them, you have this incident occur in your environment, how are you going to handle it? Because there is no one right answer. Depending on the tools that were in place, depending on requirements, different organizations have different regulations and things that they need to adhere to. There may be a different response for each of those individuals. So giving them open-ended questions that allow them to take the whole problem and walk through from start to finish is really going to reveal who are the folks that are just reciting steps that they read out of a book, or who are the folks that understand how to take a problem, break it down, and then come up with creative ways to solve it. And when you're building a SOC or an incident response team, or any team where you want investigators and analysts, having folks that answer those questions differently is key, because when you're in the thick of that incident response, if you've got a room full of people who all come up with the same idea, that's great, but you also want a diversity of opinions.
Diversity.
Yeah, you don't want to get into groupthink.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, there's a question from one of the attendees, Nora. She asks, do you think age is a problem to get into it? It's a very good question.
I'm sorry, what is a problem?
Age.
Age.
Yeah, so
I would certainly hope not. I mean, you know, I think I would imagine, I've seen incredibly proficient people in tech roles spanning the whole age range of typical, you know, working ages, from, you know, too young to legally get a drink to well past where a lot of folks choose to retire. I mean, it's, I don't know in the real world what that's kind of looking like out there, but I certainly wouldn't expect that should be a barrier.
I think
Age does not equal experience.
Yeah, I think that's what Devin was mentioning, right? The different backgrounds, reasoning different. It could be like somebody coming fresh from school that has no biases, or somebody that has a lot of experience, right? Yeah,
I think it's an advantage. I'm not going to share my age, but I go back to the DOS days. I go back to the first ransomware that came out. I think it was late 80s, 89. It was called the AIDS Trojan. You know, I'm just kind of sidetracking here, if that's okay, a little bit telling old stories, but this thing was interesting ransomware, where ransomware is basically they come in and locked on and they encrypt your entire all your files and so on. Well, this back then there was no standard encryption out there in the late 80s. So what this would do is actually it would insert itself into autoexec.batch file, and then it would change the names of all your files. So it would just do a file name shuffling. And if you gave them $190, they would give you this key, and it unshuffles all your file names. So you could still kind of find your files and so on. If I can just keep going on this a little longer, what's interesting is that since so ransomware has been around for a long time, right? And going back to '89. And if you look at typical ransomware after that, they were all intended to encrypt the machine as fast as possible. So they get on Ismail's machine and it just boom, it just, you know, encrypts everything as fast as possible, and then you get that red screen saying, hey, I want your bitcoins and so on. What we've actually seen in the past couple of years is ransomware lingering longer, and the attack target is changing from individuals to organizations. And because organizations are larger, they can pay more. Some organizations have cybersecurity insurance and so on. So it's been a kind of interesting trend. And what that actually provides also, by the way, is an opportunity to detect this happening. So their goal is to get on as many hosts as possible. It gives you a little bit more time, to sometimes weeks and months, actually, we've seen, to go after this. So I completely sidetracked from your question going back to age, but the reason I bring this up is because the way ransomware started way back when in '89, it gave me a little bit of a perspective that back then it was actually there to infect as fast as possible, or sorry, encrypt as fast as possible over the years. So having this kind of a background really helps, from what I find, in telling war stories, if nothing else.
Very good. No, it's a good story, and yeah, we can see, right? Age, it's not a problem for whether it's, you know, too young or older. Not a problem for what we're looking for as an analyst. And that brings another question. I'm looking at the questions from the audience. Please keep them going. We may not have a chance to cover them all, but we'll try. There is a question on how much can we help analysts, or how much work do we see being done in helping analysts learn the business side of what they are monitoring? That's a very good question. And, you know, whether it's ransomware or something else, any other threat, at the end of the day, analysts need context. What can be done in that sense? And any of you, feel free to. It's a very good question from Peter.
If I can jump in again, let me know if I'm talking too much, by the way. So my first 6-7 years of my career was in IT for an investment company, and the thing I learned there is translating tech talk into business means, what it means for the business. So the biggest thing that I think, biggest challenge that most of us techies have is to say, this is, I need this equipment, or this is malware coming in, and this is what it's going to do in ransomware, encrypting 50 different machines here. It's going to lock down our business, and this is the impact. And we tend to just rat hole ourselves into, here's how it came in, here's how it moved laterally, and so on. So if you can just kind of speak in their terms on what the business impact is, that just goes a super long way. You'll be surprised on with the reaction that you get from people when they say, I don't really care about how technology works, but this is how it affects me. This is how it affects my business. And you don't need to exaggerate, even if it's a small situation. They will take it as something that's much they'll see the scale of potential of the damage and so on. So think about translating it, whatever you're talking about, whether it's technology or threats and so on, into impact.
That's a good thing.
I think this is so fundamental to the effectiveness of the security organization, or the security discipline within an organization fundamentally, because and it goes to IT, it goes to the SOC, it goes to the firewall admins, everybody. If a deep understanding of and support of the business functions, the reason the organization exists, isn't baked into the DNA of all of that, you're setting yourself up for problems, and so a quick example is, if you see a shop where they tend to look at the users adversarially and, these darn users, they're the big problem here. If only we didn't have to worry about them, our lives would be easier. That's a terrible attitude, and I see it less, which is good, but it still is out there, and you're going to create lots of problems for yourself. Instead, if you embrace the users as people and understand that the whole point of the thing is the objective that your organization exists in the world to achieve, and the security team's function is to support that and to understand it. All the most impressive analysts I've known over the years have always had, I don't know what the process was that got them this, but they've always had a really good affinity for what the big picture was and what the business was all about.
Great suggestions, guys. Let me go a little bit deeper into some of the things we mentioned in the paper about investigations. We talk about missing the gorilla, right, or inattentional blindness, failing to see something that is right in front of you, but you're so focused that you miss this. What are some of the tools or the tricks, the techniques that analysts can use for that? And how can we fight biases? I'll start with you, Tim, but any of you, feel free to add comments there.
Yeah, and by the way, if you haven't seen the video, the Missing the Gorilla video, go Google it after the webcast. It's really kind of fascinating. But I could imagine an example could be something like, you're seeing weird traffic and you're seeing a bunch of it, and alarms are going off, and you're digging into it and trying to understand why you're seeing this new traffic. And you spend a bunch of time on that, and the gorilla that you didn't see is that there was a big upgrade done to some systems last night, and this is normal. And the release notes say it's going to happen, but you're going into it without even thinking about the fact that big upgrade was done last night. So that could be an example of that. And this is where some of those soft skills about stepping back for a second, zooming out, and thinking, do I have a good snapshot of the whole forest before I go into these trees? Are there any really obvious big things that happened yesterday that might explain this before I start going down the rabbit hole and looking at it at a super focused level?
So it goes back to business context, as you mentioned before. And we have a question. I'm looking at the panel here. Cynthia says, have a team member who struggles with documenting. He sees it as showing your work and a lack of trust that he knows the answer. What coaching advice would you give him to see the value of documenting his investigations? It might be related to what we're discussing. What do you think? Devin, I see you nodding there. It's like, yeah. I don't like documenting either.
Yeah, well, the thing we talked about earlier was, as a analyst, you're not operating alone. You're usually operating as a team. So there's the sharing of knowledge amongst the team, because you're stronger as a unit who's sharing that knowledge. So documentation is helping those other team members. And as well, it's a great reference point to come back and go, you know, I've handled this before, or this looks familiar, I've seen this before, you know, how did we handle this previously? Now there is the thinking of, well, can we make documenting easier? Are there tools out there that can document an incident response workflow so that in the future, you know, it's already written down? That kind of stuff you only have to do one time. Once it's documented, you have that incident response plan. Maybe you'll review it on a quarterly basis to see, you know, do we have new tools, or any of our processes need to change? But it is short-term pain for long-term gain.
Absolutely. You can measure it, right?
Yep.
If I might add to that, it's really about the culture as well. It's a culture of the practices that the team has. So a lot of times that comes from top down, so leading by example. So what works quite effectively in other areas, even in all areas, including SOC, is the manager documenting, the manager doing something, manager using a tool for tracking XYZ, whatever that might be. When the team sees somebody at a more senior level doing something, there's a very good chance that they'll follow. And if not, it gives the manager a lot of rationale, reason, ammo, conviction to go to that person and say, hey, Devin, you really need to start documenting this, like, you know, look at everybody else is doing it. So it's a culture, and usually led as an example by the leaders.
Great points.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, I love what Devin said about that you're saving yourself time in the future. And, you know, ask yourself the question, how can this thing that right now looks like a pain in the butt and something I don't want to do, what's my self-serving outcome? What's a different way to look at it where I'm actually going to help myself by doing this thing that right now looks like an onerous task that I owe to somebody else? Because there usually will be an answer in there if you ask that question that can help you and change how you feel about it.
And I feel that when you're documenting, you're also like externalizing. That's not the technique, right? You're trying to externalize your thoughts, and as you do that, you put it on paper, even if it's just like pen and paper, you are reasoning, and that helps with seeing the bigger picture, with, you know, reasoning backwards and all the techniques that we discussed already. Now, thinking about nonlinear thinking, right? Thinking about playbooks, for example, is there a case where a playbook could help to give you some sort of a set of responses or mitigations for given events? What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, that's why playbooks exist, right? Is to help save time in building a routine around certain kinds of activities that can work sort of the same way, and finding effective ways to do them. As long as you understand the limitations of playbooks and spend time in the critical thinking phases and saying, okay, the playbook makes sense for this, what I think I'm observing here. What if I've got it wrong? What if I am misinterpreting something here? So being sure to play some what if games as you go through the playbook, rather than just following it beginning to end like you're checking a bunch of boxes and not doing that critical thinking. So they're a tool, and when they're used appropriately, they can really help, and understand their limitations too is important.
So that you bring a very good point with playbooks. I've seen, you know, some SOCs, typically mature ones, that they feel that just by getting a playbook, they're going to get everything done, right? So will we ever see something like that, Devin? Like, you work in a SOC, hey, I'm going to have these playbooks, this orchestration, this automation, this AI, that's going to do everything for me, 100%. What do you think? Is that going to happen?
Never. It's always changing. The requirements for what we're monitoring and how we're going to respond are always changing. So I think to the playbook perspective, we want to continue to move away from linear thinking. When you've responded to the same alert 200 times and you go, I've got this, I know exactly what this is. All it takes is that 201st time for it to be a true positive alert, and you go, I've got this, and look past it. So the playbook is a guideline. The playbook is what is required for the organization at a minimum to go and look into a specific type of attack or do a specific type of response. But you have to keep in mind that, you know, back to the gorilla example, there's always going to be that gorilla in the background somewhere, and as soon as you start only going by the book, you're going to miss the gorilla that one time. In terms of the automation side, do I think we're ever going to get to the point where the SOC analyst can be 100% automated? Absolutely not. So don't worry, SOC analysts, your job is not going to be taken away by automation, because there is still that idea that you have to apply context to a lot of situations when you're thinking about an advanced persistent threat where there is a human actively in your environment who's moving low and slow between systems. There's no way you're 100% of the time going to be able to automatically detect those. You know, when they've got control of an account of one of your users and they're doing activity that that user would normally be doing through the course of their job, there's no anomaly there. That looks like normal behavior. You're always going to need human context to be applied to that situation to understand what's really going on. And we need you there to be building the automation. This goes back to the burnout discussion and how do we keep the SOC analyst job interesting? Building automation is one of those things that helps you build skills in other areas.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And in the paper, I talk about human machine teaming, right? Like humans doing what we do best, which is the critical thinking, you know, having passion, having creativity, and the machines doing the automation. What are vendors doing? And since we have a room full of vendors here, what are vendors doing to have this augmentation of capabilities, the human machine teaming, the machine learning from the human, right? And improving so the human can get better as well. Bassam, what do you think the industry is doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I hate to say this, but quite often we solution providers get too wrapped up in technology and ML and, you know, in kind of providing all this whiz bang technology and ignoring, you know, what really counts, which is faster identification, better context to what's being seen, and so on. So from a human-machine interface perspective, actually taking a step back from that, even there's really two personas that matter when speaking as a vendor. One is the adversary, and the other one's a defender or the practitioner. Rather than chasing new shiny objects, when you kind of put yourself in the adversary's shoes and then put yourself in the defender's shoes, it helps a lot in building products that are make the team much more effective in their interaction with the ML environments. And every ML that I know of, at least out there, is designed to learn from human behavior, and it's designed to learn from SOC behavior. So this is flagged as alerts. I'm just going to, you know, uncheck that. I'm going to say that that's not a threat. I'm going to say false positive. So it's built to learn from that. But then that shouldn't be the focus. You know, typically when you look at the defender, we should be thinking more in terms of of their role and their day-to-day life versus I've got a cool whiz-bang AI system that's going to catch everything by itself, and then think about defender. So the bottom line here is that defense should be based around the defender, not around the tools. The response should be based around centered around the analyst versus centered around the tool.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I do want to present a little counterpoint to that too, that we do still need more automation than we have today. So it will not become the end all be all, but when we think about the types of attacks that we're seeing today, we have malware being generated by AI, we have penetration happening because of automated scanning. The attackers are already using ML and AI today. So when we talk about maturing the SOC or maturing security engineering and operations, most organizations aren't using enough automation or ML today. We have to fight fire with fire, and it's already happening on the attacker side. So organizations should be looking at how they can implement machine learning at a greater capacity than they probably are today.
It's about a balance, right? There should be some sort of a balance there. And Bassam, to the point you made about thinking as an attacker, there's a question from Sri that I would like to throw to the panel as well. Is it mandatory to have red team skills like pen testing to work as an efficient analyst? What do you think?
I don't know that it's absolutely necessary, but I think understanding the basics of it is really important. How can you do threat modeling if you don't think like an attacker? So you have to at least have, you know, a decent, a pretty good understanding of those skills. Maybe not necessary to go super deep on it and literally participate on a red team, although that wouldn't hurt. But definitely having some good foundation in it and some exposure to it, I would say is very, very important.
I would concur. So it's from my perspective, it's less about learning the attacker's mentality. It's more about the intent. So the whole reason why you need this skill, that's good way of thinking, is to understand the intent specific to this campaign, or specific to this attack, specific to your organization. What are they trying to do? What's the intent there? And that's where it comes in to be super handy, which is if you understand the intent, it opens up a lot of creative ideas for you to think about in defense.
Intense, that's such a key word, right? Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're reaching, I say unfortunately because I'm enjoying this discussion so much, but we're almost on top of the hour. And I would like to summarize it somehow. So, you know, I was thinking maybe I can ask you how to get, if you could give one recommendation to somebody that is either an analyst today or that wants to become an analyst. But I'm going to use the words of one of our attendees, because I think he put this you know, in better words than I could. He said it would be interesting if the panelists would try to create for us, from their experience, a typical profile of a good analyst. And he finished, by the way, is it a coincidence that all the guests have a beard? So maybe to become a good analyst, you have to have a beard. That's funny. But yeah, so, you know, starting maybe with you, Devin, we can go, you know, team and Bassam. What's the profile of a good analyst, and what's the advice that you would give?
Sure. I'll use a personal story and how I ended up being a SOC analyst. From when I was very, very little, I loved to take things apart and figure out how they work. When I go to concerts, I'm that person that's going, wow, I'm wondering how they produced that effect, or how did they configure this? It's just part of my personality to try to pick things apart and see how they work. So that kind of inquisitive nature, which has been part of my personality, is what led me to this kind of work. A genuine interest in trying to figure out, you know, what's the story behind this, and not just following that playbook every single time, I think is what makes a great analyst.
That's exactly my thinking as well. It's the curiosity and going back, I grew up in Germany. When I was a kid, people used to call me the Kaputtmachermeister, which means I love taking things apart, basically break them. And so that having the curiosity and understanding the mentality and the intent, I keep going back to that, I think is super important. So if you're curious as to why somebody's doing something, and it's always the person. I know there's ML and a lot of attack techniques that are out there, but there's ultimately an intent. So be curious, try to understand the intent of the attacker.
Excellent.
And to add to that, I would say for me that my advice is sort of combined with the profile, which is my advice is go for it. Like if this is something you're interested in, go for it. If you've got a passion, analysts aren't born, but every human is born with a lot of key ingredients for becoming a good analyst. We're born with curiosity. We're born with these brains that are incredibly good at pattern matching and recognizing things like that. So you've got a lot of the raw materials already, I guarantee it. And if you add to that the passion and curiosity, do it. We need you.
Well, thank you so much for well, all the pearls of wisdom that you have dropped throughout the entire interview. But you know, these conclusions were amazing. Thank you, Devin, team, Bassam. Thank you to Palo Alto Networks, to DomainTools, and Gigamon for sponsoring this paper and for being here today. Thank you so much. And that's it from us. I will take it back to you, Carol. Thank you to all the attendees for contributing with their excellent questions. I know there were more than we could possibly cover throughout this time, but I'm pretty sure that well, the guests and even myself, you can contact us either through LinkedIn or Twitter, and we can continue the discussion over there. Back to you, Carol.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ismail, Tim, Devin, and Bassam for your great presentation, and to DomainTools, Gigamon, Palo Alto Networks for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thank you.